Hello, my name is Heather Hendricks, and I'm going to be presenting about disciplinary literacy in the math setting. First off, I'm going to start off with a little icebreaker, and I want you to think about what you know about disciplinary learning, what you want to know, and what have you learned. So this is every teacher's favorite, the KWL chart. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to fill in the chart on your handout. So, as you all were walking around, I decided to put a couple ideas in that I heard you sharing. So, this included what you already know, discipline has to do with subjects, literacy has to do with comprehending, it's part of the English teacher's job, and has to do with writing and vocabulary. What some of you and your colleagues would like to know is, how does literacy look in content areas? How do I make time for this? Is this in my standards? And what can I build on that children are already doing in English class? So as we go through, we'll definitely hit some of these. Today's objectives are understanding what literacy looks like in the math setting, how we can foster math literacy in our own classroom, and addressing the obstacles of literacy in math. Now, I'm going to let you know now that it doesn't look like a traditional literature class, because in math you're working with numbers and trying to solve equations versus trying to interpret information presented in text and determine meaning from it. So let's define disciplinary literacy. So disciplinary literacy can be best thought of as learning content, such as domain-specific vocabulary in a subject, through various literacy techniques. This includes being able to read, understand, and communicate effectively the language of a particular content area. It also means that students become experts in their field and are able to speak, write, listen, and read specific literature in that content area. So, literature is a little different in math because a lot of the times it's reading text on how to solve an equation. So, this is definitely when students are in that reading to learn versus learning to read. Because they're not just trying to sound out the information, they're really trying to gain understanding on how to do something from this information. So, what does disciplinary literacy look like in math? Well, there's three major components to disciplinary literacy. You have discourse, which is your language of the discipline. So that includes vocabulary and how you communicate. So reading word problems, writing and transcribing problems. Epistemology is how you show your knowledge. And so that includes solving problems successfully and being able to successfully explain how you got to a conclusion, which, as we all know, is a major component of the Common Core. Practice includes reading, being able to read word problems, solving equations, graphing, measuring, drawing diagrams, interpreting diagrams. So think about, how do you think this changes as students move through different grade levels? So spend a moment talking to the person next to you about how things change. Is it going to look the same in first grade math, next to fourth grade math, going all the way into high school when they tackle subjects like algebra, geometry, statistics, and calculus? What do you think are the differences? So let's focus on the next major component, which is discourse. So this includes the reading, the writing, and the discussion. So we're reading word problems, we're reading text in the textbook. Writing includes writing equations, writing to explain thinking, writing possibly their own word problems, as well as writing and creating diagrams. Discussion becomes important when our students are conferring with their peers, verbally explaining plot processes, as well as even the teacher lecturing and explaining how to solve a problem for the very first time, and helping to scaffold and guide our students through the new equations that they're learning how to process. Vocabulary is unique in math because math vocabulary words generally are all considered third-tier words and only relate to the one discipline. When you change the word, you change the function. So if you think about it, when we discuss addition, addition is a very different function versus multiplying. If we're saying that we have 5 times as many of something versus we have 5 more of something, our problem changes in how a child would solve it. So our first activity, I have some word problems printed out on your handout, and I want you to take a moment to find the keywords. So this is a great activity to use with your students to make sure that they understand our different function words and that they can identify what they mean in our problem. This is great with our ELL students because it reinforces the meaning of the different words that they're going to learn how to read so they can recognize what each function calls for. So our first equation is Jen has 8 apples. Pat has 10 apples. How many more apples does Pat have than Jen? So now take a minute to highlight what are the key words that tell us how we need to solve this problem. All right, so most of you probably would have noticed many more because we're looking at a difference in how many apples Pat and Jen each have. So since Pat has the larger number, we should subtract how many apples Jen has to determine the difference. So 10 minus 8 equals, glad you guys all got the same answer of 2. Let's try this again. And since we are working with lower grade levels, these are first grade Common Core problems, so it should look familiar to what our students are using in their own text. So 10 bunnies were sitting on the grass. Some more bunnies hopped there. Now there are 12 bunnies on the grass. How many bunnies hopped over there? So take a minute to highlight what are those keywords and tell us what kind of problem we need to solve here. So again, we have a find the difference problem. We have some more, and now now there's this many bunnies, how many more join them? So we can look at this at first as an addition problem. So we had 10 bunnies to start, we ended it with 12. So now we have to figure out how do we get that middle number. So if we subtract 10 from 12, we get 2. So looking at how many, and we're looking at the difference between how many there were and how many there are now, we can figure out that 2 more bunnies came to join our first 10. So the next major component is epistemology, and this is showing what you know. So the number one way you can show what you know in math is by successfully solving a problem. This is usually the best way to show that a student has mastered a particular concept. Explaining how a conclusion is reached in a problem is also very important because you can actually see the child's thought process as they're solving the problem. And this has become a major component of the Common Core, is being able to explain your thinking and explain how you might have arrived at a conclusion. You'd be very interested to find out how students arrive with certain conclusions, but this also helps you understand where they might be confused about a certain aspect of the problem. I also brought up manipulatives because manipulatives are another way of showing problem-solving skills, especially for students who are a lot more hands-on. They can visualize with counters, using bears, blocks, Legos, whatever they need to being able to manipulate something to show how numbers change. So now we're getting into the practice, or what you actually do in math. So for this part, we're going to do a jigsaw, and you're going to break up into 3 groups. We'll have a reading group, a writing group, and a technology group. And then we'll mix back up to share our thinking. So if you flip over on the back side of your handout, there's a space for each of you to record your ideas that you talk with your groups. Then you can go out and share it and take notes. So there might be something that you think of, oh, well, this will fit into technology, but I'm in the reading group. But you might get some good ideas from another teacher, and of course, whoever wants to reinvent the wheel. So take a minute to start talking with your groups about each of your categories, and then we'll mix back up again. All right, so now it's time to share your thinking. So if we could have one person from each group get together and share their ideas. And now we'll share out a couple ideas from each category. So if we could have someone from reading throw out a couple ideas in case we missed any. And writing. And technology. I personally am a big fan of the technology component just because it makes another very interactive component for students, especially with them using so much technology at home and getting them just used to using different modes of communication. All right, so now we're going to revisit our KWL chart. I know I'm personally guilty of not revisiting this, and I wanted to make sure we address it here. So, what are some things that we have learned today? So, disciplinary literacy includes communicating and showing knowledge. This is pretty easily integrated with your own math lessons. If you think back to those problems that we looked at, those are just basic problems, and we can highlight on our papers that our students are already using. So, you don't have to come up with a whole new lesson. Just use it within the lessons that you already have. This also can be used with our English skills because you can use comprehension to help the students dissect problems. Again, we're looking for those key words so we understand what the functions are with our kids. So before we actually step into your turn to plan and how you can integrate some of these ideas into your own lessons, I want to leave you with this last thought. This is from Moji in one of her articles. And mathematicians engage in what seem like similar practices of questioning to contextualizing, representing, proving, and consulting. They would not consider themselves investigators, but would rather be seen as problem solvers or proof seekers who work through the logic of a problem context. So what's in this quote, we realize that with math is different. We've been saying that from the beginning. And we're looking for proof and problem solving versus trying to investigate to discover knowledge. So you really help your students to prove what they think with their different literacy skills. All right, now it's your turn to plan. So please take a moment to start thinking about how you could use these strategies in your own room. I will be coming around to help you out, and thank you for coming.